Honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am Hemi Yu from the Office of the President and Republic of Korea. Today, I'm going to talk about the present and future of Korea's policies to address low birth rates. As you all know, Korea has the world's lowest fertility rate as of 2023. Is not such an welcoming news, but it is an opportunity to address low birth rates and make a good example that other countries can follow. So I'd like to just thank Ms. Julia Bunting for giving me this opportunity to talk about this issue in today's forum. And any views or ideas shared in this forum will be great inputs for our future policies. So I'd like to talk about three things. First, I'd like to talk about trends in the total fertility rate in Korea and how the Korean government has responded to them so far. And then I'm going to talk about three core areas the Korean government now focuses on to tackle low birth rate crisis. And then I'm going to talk about a few future policy issues. So let me first show you a figure here. This is the total fertility rate in Korea since 1970. As you all see, there has been secular decline in the total fertility rate in Korea since 1970. The total fertility rate in 1970 was 4.53, but as of 2023, it just dropped down to 0.72. And there have been actually three cliffs where the total fertility rate has dropped very dramatically. So the first sub-period was around mid-1980s, and it is associated with this birth control policy implemented by the Korean government. So they actually discouraged people to having more children, from having more children at the time, even though the replacement rate of 2.1 was broken in 1983. And the second cliff was around the Asian financial crisis in 1997 and 1998. After that, economic uncertainty soared very rapidly, and that was a very bad environment for people to consider marriage or having child. And the most recent decline started in around 2016. Some people just talk about widespread of social media was one important reason, and others point out rapidly rising house prices in Korea since 2017. But for sure, any one single factor cannot explain this decline. And compared with this OECD average, this decline in the total fertility rate in Korea is so dramatic. So the average total fertility rate among OECD member countries was 2.7 in 1970, and it just dropped down to 1.5 in 2022. But that drop is not really comparable to what we had in Korea. So Korea has experienced this very rapid decline in total fertility rate. And the Korean government has responded to this declining birth rates somehow. In 1988, parental leave was first adopted by the Korean government, and the parental leave was up to 1 year. And in 2001, maternity leave has been extended from 60 days to 90 days. And in 2008, paternity leave was adopted, and also reduced work hours have been adopted for parents with young children. So we have done something. And after that, the policy focus has moved to strengthening childcare system, especially the public ones. So in 2012, fully funded childcare system has been adopted. And after that, cash assistance programs were the most frequent types of policies that support families with young children. So we have adopted and introduced childcare allowances, parent allowances, and other types of benefits for newborns and children under age 6 or 8. So we have done something so far, but it was not enough to turn the trend. So why Koreans aren't having babies? That is the question we had, and many other countries also had, by just looking at this lowest fertility rate in Korea. And we have done a lot of surveys and research, and we also looked up these previous studies. And what we have found is that in Korea, they just think the career break, the fear of career break is one major reason for not having children, but rising housing costs or rising cost of education is another reason. And OECD report just points out long working hours in Korea as another potential explanation for this low fertility rate in Korea. The OECD average annual hours worked is 1,746 hours, but in Korea, the average annual hours worked is more than 1,900 hours. So by just working so much, how can you just maintain a life with children? So it is very challenging for people to balance work and life in Korea now. So we had to just think about what can address these issues and problems. But existing policies are mostly concentrated, especially recent policies are mostly concentrated on this cash assistance. Cash assistance is also important, but their effects are mostly short-lived and their effects are pretty limited. So we need to do something else. So based on that kind of recognition, we had shifted the policy paradigm by emphasizing the work-family balance, childcare support, and housing support. So these are three core areas I'd like to just emphasize, and these are the areas the Korean government is now focused on to tackle low birth rate crisis. So on June 19 this year, the Korean government announced a policy package. So this is called Policy Responses to Low Fertility, and it outlines these three core areas the government is going to focus to tackle this low birth rate crisis. One is work-family balance, and second is childcare, and the last one is housing. So let me first talk about this work-family balance. So I have a table here. So it just compares the representative policy in line with this work-family balance, which is parental leave program of different countries. So we have this case of France and Sweden. They are known for very good practices and institutions in terms of work-family balance, especially in parental leave program. So if you compare the duration or age limit of this parental leave program of Korea with these advanced countries, we have very similar programs and institutions to advanced countries, but the income replacement rate is relatively lower. So what we have done in this policy package, we have increased the income replacement rate during parental leave. And we also extended the duration of parental leave and reduced work hours for parents with young children. And then this was not enough. So institutional improvement, it cannot just solve everything. So in addition to this institutional improvement, we have provided small and medium enterprises, especially because they are just complaining about the cost of this introducing this family-friendly institutions. So we offer them tax deferrals or other incentives so that they can foster this culture of family-friendly culture or work-family balancing culture. And we also try to promote awareness and work-family balance by recognizing companies which has family-friendly culture. And we wanted to just share their best practices. So we just have done such events and some campaign to just promote awareness in family-friendly culture. So that is outlined in this policy package. And the second core area is childcare. So childcare does not just talk about just childcare itself. It just covers education costs. It covers child parent allowances or tax incentives for parents, etc. So if you compare this cost of education or the childcare system and others of Korea with other countries, then similar to advanced countries, Korean government emphasized the role of the public sector in offering childcare services universally and just reducing the cost of education. But the current system was not sufficient. So we have strengthened this childcare support more in this policy package. So what we have done, the Korean government just wanted to increase the quality of education at preschool stage. So we integrated early childhood education with childcare. So if parents go for childcare or daycare center, they can have full care for their children, but the education quality may not have been very high. If you just send your children to kindergarten, education quality might be high, but you probably cannot get full-time care. So integrating these two will increase the quality of childcare at preschool age, and also the full-time care will be provided to all parents. So that is one change. And second, we just strengthened the childcare through elementary school, because many parents were complaining about the break in childcare after just their children enter elementary school. So what we have done, we have expanded this after-school care program called Leverhulme. So this is a combination of after-school education program and after-school childcare. So after school, they can stay in school and they can get high-quality after-school education program, but they will be also cared for by students. So that is another important change. And we also raised parent allowances, and we increased child tax credit amount. So we wanted to strengthen the support for childcare. And the last one is about housing. In Korea, the house price to income ratio is pretty high. So housing prices is relatively higher than in many other advanced countries. So young adults were just complaining about this very high housing cost, and that was considered as one major reason why they do not have babies. And one recent research by the Bank of Korea just shows that there is negative correlation between housing prices and birth rates. So we have strengthened our the support for young adults in terms of housing a lot in this policy package, so that they can afford their own houses or they can afford rental houses without any difficulties. So we have expanded housing supply a lot for newlyweds and households with newborns. So it is not just expanding housing supply, it also prioritizing households with newborns in the housing presale program. And we also increased the supply of public rental housing for newlyweds and households with newborns. And these policies are very welcomed by young adults in Korea now. So what else can we do to tackle this low birth rate crisis? So we think that empowering youth through employment is very, very important. In Korea, youth employment rate is relatively lower compared with OECD average. So youth unemployment rate is about 58% as of like 2022, but OECD average is 66%. So if young adults do not have jobs, then they cannot really think about having children or getting married. So we need to empower youth through employment. So what can we do? We can support youth by implementing employment support programs like internships or project-based employment program. And we also provide small and medium enterprises with financial incentives if they hire young adults or youth as regular employees and retain them for some time. Another thing we can think about is concentration in metropolitan areas or in capital areas. Population density in capital areas in Korea is very, very high. So everybody wants to go to Seoul or capital areas and they want to have jobs. But because so many people try to go to Seoul, the socially very competitive environment is established and housing prices just soaring up. So it just causes a lot of social issues. So the Korean government is now implementing 4 structural reforms in education, pension system, healthcare, and labor. And completion of these 4 structural reforms will actually help ease concentration in capital areas and develop more balanced regional development. So if that is completed, then it will help address low birth rates. And what else is remaining? In Korea, infertility and subfertility are on the rise because age at first marriage is increasing in Korea as well. So we'd like to think about ways to leverage medical technology to boost birth rates. Another thing is about this birth out of wedlock. In Korea, the share of birth out of wedlock is still low compared with OECD average, but it's rising. So in 2018, it was 2.2%, but it just went up to 4.7% in 5 years. So we'd like to just make sure that every child, whether or not they were born out of wedlock, are fully protected and supported by the government. So that is another thing we can think about further. So this is all I prepared. Thank you again for giving me an opportunity to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yu, for your very insightful and informative presentation. And we look forward to cooperating with you and your office. Our next keynote speaker will explore the role of data in guiding policy decisions in low fertility context. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Professor Melinda from the Leverhulme Center for Demographic Science, University of Oxford, and moderator Dr. Alessio Cangiano, Senior Advisor, Demographic Megatrends, Acting Chief, Population and Development Branch of the Program Division of UNFPA, who will moderate the Q&A after that speech.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for the very interesting presentation, which is a perfect introduction to what I'm about to say. I've been asked to speak about data, and I will take a different perspective, I think, from some of the things that we've heard, given my background as well, too. So I'm going to focus on different aspects. I'm going to focus on some of the common approaches that we've discussed over the last days. But I'd like to push the boundaries a little bit and talk about some of the things we haven't discussed over the last days as well. Some of them were just mentioned, actually, in terms of relation to medical technologies and infertility. And then I want to talk about methods as well, just shortly, about how we can see whether these policies work or not, which I think is really important and something we should look at. So I think we've talked about some of the commonly examined policies, and we just had a review, and this is not just in Korea, but across many different countries that are grappling with low fertility. Things such as parental leave, childcare services, family-friendly work conditions, gender inequality. We've looked at these things for many, many years to try to understand, are these the reasons that we are having low fertility? So one thing I would like to sort of scrutinize the existing policies and say, should we move beyond measurement? So I've been asked to speak about data and measurement. So instead of collecting information, we often see the league tables of countries are, Korea or Hungary is number 1 or 2 in terms of expenditures. But I would like to shift the focus to look at who's actually not using these and to look at who's ineligible as well. So who falls out of these policy domains? So we know there's a high employment rate in Korea, and we know also that there's a gender wage gap. But what I would like to say is, there's also, I think we need more data, and we need to scrutinize the informal labor market and the self-employed. So often women are eligible if they have a dependent relationship with a large company, we saw yesterday, or with employers, but who falls out and is not eligible for these? So that's one data plea I would like to call for. The same thing in the same discussion would be for parental leave. We actually have very generous parental leave if you look at it, but then there's very low take up. So, Korea is at the second lowest. So although we have this generous policies, why is there low take up? And there's a few reasons. I just, the point I said is, it's perhaps unavailable for a large group of women that are in the informal labor market or self-employed. Now, we've seen an analysis of Hungary, who's spending almost 5% of their GDP on pronatalist family policies, the same issue. So it's the self-employed women outside of the formal labor market that are actually ineligible and unable to take these. So is there a way that those policies could be extended to those groups as well, too? And who's being refused? This would be very difficult to see, but who's actually asked for this leave, men or women, and not been able to take it? So that would be another data insight I think we could think about. Now, this was already discussed, and I think the policies in June are moving towards what I'm about to say right now, too. So I think the other tension you have with childcare is the location, but also the hours. And hours was just discussed as well, too. So we often, and there's been this shift in this focus, we talked about it yesterday, but as well, we just heard as well, too, there's a shift to early childcare. And it's really concentrated on this preschool childcare. And as a result, you've seen this huge rapid enrollment into preschool childcare, and that's actually has benefits as well for children we've seen over time, particularly those that are in the lowest socioeconomic groups for further development and childhood development. So those are things all going in the right direction. But does it match people's lives? So I want to stop and think about this a little bit. And I want to think about in terms of where people live and where they work. So we just heard that it is heavily concentrated, urbanized location in Seoul. And what we see is actually a large group of people are using, so we're talking about the school hours. Now that's been extended. That's been recognized and extended. I think that will help quite a bit. But then there's this large group using sort of private tutoring. So I think there has to be more information collected there. So what is the childcare used in the early childcare, tutoring, and things outside of the public provision? And if you look at commuting, I think that is the kind of data that we need to really understand, does childcare and work and employment, does that fit into people's lives? And we've seen some really interesting geospatial temporal analyses done by geographers and others that actually look at and there's a great collection of data of Internet of Things, of movements and mobility within Korea, where you'd be able to monitor people's trajectories. And what you see, and I don't think it's any surprise of anyone who lives here, the commuting times are double of many countries. So one way an hour and one way back. So these are really extreme. And there was also a discussion about the geography. So the geography is really important too. But thinking about this commute back and forth, and how does that relate to childcare? And how is this related to these really long working hours as well, too? So I think all of these issues need to be looked at and grappled with as well. So large employers are offering childcare, but if it takes you an hour to commute to work and an hour to commute back, is this really a realistic offer that you can take up? So I want to move beyond. I won't be able to talk about all of these, but I've picked two of them. So I talked about geospatial trajectories. I think the location is really important that we start thinking about it. We talked yesterday about education systems and competition. I think that's another area. We haven't talked much about immigration, but when you have a changing population or needs for childcare, could this be a solution? Some countries have rethought social care, combining old age institutionalized care with daycares, and that helps with in-laws and your own children and combining these things. So some countries have thought of it in that way. But I'd like to focus on the last two things, and that's about physical health and mental health and loneliness. And how that's related to housing as well, too. So I just want to offer this alternative approach that perhaps focusing on fertility and family policies might not be where we want to focus. So it's a bit provocative, but let me explain it. So I think in many countries, when we stand back, low fertility is sort of the symptom that we're seeing, but there's something upstream, and that's mental health. It's well-being, it's feeling good about yourself, and it's feeling certain that you have a horizon that you're able to have children with. So that's actually the problem. And then not marrying, not having children is downstream. And we seem to be intervening on the problem halfway through, whereas the largest problem is a public health crisis and a mental health crisis. So that's my hypothesis of what could be an alternative explanation. So a lot of studies have looked at loneliness. It's comparable to 15 cigarettes a day or 6 alcoholic drinks a day. So that's often underestimated on how loneliness is actually a a real issue. And it's created by the social structure. It's created by the built environment, by housing, by social networks as well. And there's a large proportion of single households of Koreans living alone. There's been a phenomenon of dying alone in isolation, and the levels of depression are about 7.7%, which are much higher in comparison to other OECD countries. Whereas many countries, not just Korea, spend a low amount on mental health, so it's no exception. And then we have levels of poverty, and we've talked about housing as well, too, and the stratification of housing of some groups being older or lower socioeconomic and actually being stratified from society. So housing can create this loneliness and generate it and this lack of community. So as a result, I mean, there have been many things, and it's often separated from fertility and family policies, but I would say bring them together, these ideas about loneliness and mental health, and particularly the focus on men, which I'm going to talk about as well. So we published last month talking about the importance of collecting data on families. So we published it in Nature, and you can, it's fully available. We talked about it in relation to looking at biological aspects, such as those related to fertility, but also looking at intergenerational and families as a form of support as well, and how that's so important to collect data on families. Often we've been talking about individuals as if this was an individual choice to have a child, but it's often within a larger network and a family. So I want to give you an example of an alternative explanation using data, because my topic was data, and how you could actually understand childlessness from linking it to medical data and hospital records. So we published this in Nature Human Behavior last year, and we wanted to understand, particularly in Finland and Sweden, why we had these extremely high levels of childlessness. And there was often a socially deterministic sort of approach, thinking, okay, it's all social. Well, let's look at it and see what kind of diseases these people have. So in Finland, there was a huge rise. And in Finland, I'd like to make a parallel with Korea in Finland at the moment. And I know it seems like a jump, but work with me. And I think I see some parallels between these two societies. So about 1/3 of men are not having children. That's a really large amount. But only about 5% of that are actually voluntarily choosing that. So there's this large group that are not having children. So what is it? Is it gender equality? Is it housing? Is it all of these things? And we thought, well, let's look at a different explanation. And what medically are these people? So, you know, are they different from the general population? And you'll see here, I hope I'm pushing the right button. I am. Okay, good. You'll see here the levels of never married and childless individuals in Korea. So I'm just showing this. This has very many parallels with Finland as well. So these 1/3 that aren't having children are also not entering into partnerships. So we wanted to understand that a little bit further. So we used population register data, and this is an analysis on 2.5 million people linked to their medical records from birth until the end of their reproductive window. For women, that's 45, and for men, it was determined at 55. So we look at it, we link with all of the sort of medical events they have and try to understand it across 400 diseases. What was the finding? Mental health. So that was the largest finding. And we did a mediation causal analysis. I won't bore you with it, but the main thing is these people were not entering into partnerships as well. And that was the explanation. And then they were not having children. And for men, the biggest reason was mental illness, but alcohol. So repeated, actually even going into the hospital for alcohol intoxication. So alcohol was a huge factor here. And also nutritional metabolic disorders as well. So obesity-related disorders. Type 1, type 2 diabetes for women was the main factor, also digestive problems, and inflammatory diseases, so chronic stress. So these people are experiencing chronic stress, mental health, and metabolic disorders. And to be honest, when we looked at the medical files of 2.5 million people, I was expecting infertility and reproductive related problems. I wasn't expecting it to be mostly mental health. So this was a really interesting hypothesis-free sort of approach. So we were surprised by the results. Alcohol dependence for men and women changes over the life course, and men are the dotted line and women, whereas they go down. We see the age at onset where you become very dependent on alcohol is around the time when you would be forming a partnership and you would also be having children. And these, I can't go through everything, but you can look it up on the paper as well too. So if we look at the leading causes of death as well in Korea, we see actually a few sort of similarities and parallels with Finland in particular. So you have your cancers, which have been going up over time, and heart diseases. But in the top 5, it's very unusual in comparison to other countries. Suicide is one of the top 5. So that's related to stress and mental health and all of these issues that we were talking about. It's the highest rate. You can see that differentiates over different ages. So in women from 20 to 29, we see an increase in that group. But you also see a very high rate of suicides among the elderly as well. So this is unusual in comparison to some other countries, and that's related to this isolation, loneliness. It's related to housing as well, again, and the built environment. If we look at the burden of disease in Korea, we see, similar to Finland, we see that diabetes is one of the top ones. So that's, if you can't have glycemic control, it's also difficult to get pregnant as well too. And you're actually even advised against pregnancy with certain medications. But then we see the long working hours coming in. We see lower back pain. So that's related to sitting for a long time. We see stroke, all of these major depressive disorders. And a lot of it's, so diabetes and these lower back pain, it's related to diet and nutrition, but it's mostly related to lack of movement and mobility as well too. So commuting, long hours, sitting is a really dangerous activity as well too. And I'd just like to highlight this paper that came out last year as well too. And I thought it was just a great paper. It was done in the Netherlands, and how you can use machine learning. So we often say, oh, it's gender equality or it's housing, or, you know, what is it that is related to well-being? So in the Netherlands, they have register data, and you can link it across the exposome, which is multiple environmental factors, with right down to biology. And they did a hypothesis-free machine learning model. And what they found was the most important thing that predicts well-being is housing. It's housing. So you know, so this is something that's really interesting. So it's about your size of your house, and it's also about social support, but it's also about your sense of optimism and your personality as well too. So this was a really interesting paper that sort of put the relative comparison, just like we did with the diseases. It compares it to the large ecosystem of different things. Okay, my last point that I wanted to raise was about biological data, and this was discussed in terms of infertility. So when you are having your mean age at first birth at age 33, you should start thinking about infertility in biology. So that's something that I've looked at as well for about the last decade of my research. We'll have something coming out in Nature Aging, so you get a preview of it. It's coming out in December, where we looked at every genetic study related to fertility and infertility over time. And we do a review of this. So if you're interested, you can look at that aspect. But I think what's interesting from, you know, what I wanted to highlight is we've been talking a lot about the top aspect, So if we think about reproduction, we've been talking about the social factors, and often we don't think about the biological factors and the infertility factors, and we discussed that in this paper. But you can see things such as, risk-taking, but also sort of genetically and biologically regulated aspects related to hormones and related to, so also this diabetes, this interaction with these diseases and being sedentary really is related to hormones, and it's also related to multiple factors that interact with an inability to conceive. So I think that's important, and we can look at fertility decline sort of biologically. And there's been this shift and changes in relation to nutrition in onset of menopause and all of these different aspects that are very, very important. So we found that these traits were very much related to lifespan and aging. So I can't go into that in detail, but we have this sort of shift in menopause as well too. And something we don't often talk about, but if you're working and commuting those many hours, it has to influence like reproduction and sexual behavior and just well-being in general. And as well, hormonal concentration turned out to be one of the big findings that we had here too. And I think we forget about this as people age. And if you're starting to have your children at age 33, this is an issue. I won't go into this in detail, but I just wanted to highlight the top 2 genes that we found because I think they're relevant. Follicle stimulating hormones. So we know about this, but this really changes as people age as well too. And so when you're starting having your children in your 30s, that actually the genetic propensity actually might become more important for these things. So factors we didn't realize before. And then the second gene is FTO. So that's the obesity related gene. So this is really becoming important too as we have nutritional deficiencies as well. We're also focusing on, one of the aspects that we've decided to focus on now within our group is looking more at men, because this seems to be, so we often have this focus on women, but we're looking at men and mental health and all of these different related aspects. And I think it's quite important to shift the discussion also away from women, especially when we have these high suicides and very low levels of well-being. So on my final point, I just wanted to think a little bit about, and perhaps you're already doing it, but in some countries, they're doing randomized control trials. So when you roll out these, let's say, changing the opening hours or changing parental leave, you pilot it in different locations or across different regions, and you do a randomized control trial. That will allow you to say, I changed the working hours in this location compared to this location, and it will allow you to causally say, this seems to have changed this. So I think sort of scrutinizing our policies in a more methodological way and treating them like control trials would be a advantage. Also, I talked about geospatial temporal mobility analysis, and I think we can do a lot more with machine learning now to actually, instead of just running and focusing on what we think are the usual suspects. We were surprised when we linked the medical data. Also, I showed you the study in the Netherlands that found that housing came out and social support came out as the most important things. So to stand back, not focus on what we've normally focused on, and if it hasn't been working, think about new alternatives. So I think I've already concluded. I would just like to think about systems approach, medical reasons, biological, genetic factors, and just try to take a fresh approach in a new way. So thank you very much.
Insightful. I'm not going to try to summarize this, but I think I want to highlight where you started, which is the importance of looking at whether policies work. Very often we assume that we provide the services and then that's it, we've done our job. But in fact, there's the issue of uptake and understanding the factors of low uptake. I think it's extremely important. Highlighting that some groups may be excluded and these groups may be some of the most vulnerable. I think that's always something that we should keep in mind. But also these are groups that often are not traceable in data systems, so which make it, this makes a bigger challenge. I I think you raised a number of issues related to the importance of looking at the systemic causes, at the root causes, rather than at the intermediary level where we normally act in terms of policies. So definitely something to bear in mind. Issues around social isolation, loneliness, mental health. Thank you for focusing on this. I think definitely very important. And also, I think it was extremely fascinating how you highlighted the potential for innovative methodological approaches that combine different types of data to understand the complexity of low fertility. For example, through linking biological and social data. I think this is really important, and it shows really the importance of integrated data system where you can indeed link. And you know, so in some of these high income countries, we do have the possibility to do this kind of analysis. I hope we can have about 10 minutes. I'm looking at Yumi. Can we carry on for 10 minutes for questions? Okay, she's gone. But anyway, let me take some questions from the floor. Please.
Yeah.
I think he's bringing it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'm a professor of economics in Korea University. I'm Kim. I think it was very useful. Actually, nice to see that there is this strong connection between mental health and the fertility. I was just wondering whether the strong connection actually implies this causation. You mean as an economist, I'm interested in this causation, and the thing is that maybe it's if I simplify the world a little bit, well, actually a lot, then it's maybe an individual, maybe a household network have a choice between having a child and consume alcohol. It's a very simplifying world. And then, as we have seen, that the price of the cost of having a child is rising rapidly, whereas access to alcohol is very easy. So then, then because of this structure, environment or price structure, just induces this consumption on the health hurting items relative to the having children. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would have expected a question about causation from an economist. So thank you for doing your discipline proud. So you're completely right. These are correlations. So we showed associations between mental health. We did do in as well, so that seemed to be the causal mechanism of why they, so the question is really about, why are these people not entering into partnerships as well too. I did talk about, randomized control trials. And I mean, the one thing that you notice in sort of social science research in general and family policy research is there's less focus on causation and doing randomized control trials, whereas you could actually do it. If you're spending this much money and introducing these policies, you could, and we saw a really interesting study by Kravdal and Rinfus a long time ago in Norway, where they did a randomized control trial introducing different types of childcare in different geographical regions, and they actually could show a causal effect. So I think you're right. But I still think that even though I'm showing, we're showing causations here, I think we're, as I said before, at risk of repeating myself, I think we're intervening at the wrong point. If we're talking about let's get people to marry and let's give newlyweds housing, why are they not, and you're saying, okay, they could choose for alcohol or children. Well, you could choose for alcohol or going for a jog or a run too, so it's not like a binary choice here. And substance use and mental health, it's often a coping mechanism. You know, so why are people, and you know, you could see it in Finland, you've seen it in the deaths of despair data in countries such as the US. I'm Canadian, by the way, just saying. You know, you can see that these are coping mechanisms when people are facing uncertainty in economics and they want to numb things out. So I think this substance use and mental health is actually, there's something going on there as well too. But you're right, more studies would have to show whether this is the case. But, you know, otherwise I just worry you spend more and more money on intervening where probably if you have this high suicide rate and all of these substance and mental health issues, you're probably not intervening at the right point. It's a larger point.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Can I ask a question, Melinda? Can you perhaps reflect on some of the ethical considerations surrounding the use of biological data, genetic data research, particularly given the further utilization of loss data?
Yeah, so there's a few problems with using genetic data in research, particularly in relation to fertility. It's got a bad history in terms of biology and fertility, so I don't need to remind anyone of that. We've published some genetic wide association analyses. So it's again associations, but you show an association with genetic, they're called single nucleotide polymorphisms. So these genetic variants, and we've looked at it with age at first birth, number of children ever born. We've shown some relationships, and there's some overlap as well with these, often with the kind of behavioral traits I was talking about. So the point here is when you do a genetic wide search on complex behavior related to fertility, and it's not a one Mendelian, so a one gene factor like you would have with Huntington's disease, it's called polygenic. So there are multiple genetic variants across the genome that contribute to this. So it's a very complex, and you produce this index. So it's a very, and it interacts with multiple things. So it's very hard to introduce something like that into, people have tried to sell it for ART and different factors. And, you know, something like that is not predictive of, you know, the timing or the number of children you'll have. If you think about variance is explained by 100%, the genetic predictors that we and others have found related to timing number of children predicts about up to 7%. It's still quite high. But it definitely is always interacting with the family and the family environment, and social factors still are more important than genetic factors unless it's an infertility related disease. So I think it's really tricky for multiple reasons. Some people have argued you can use it. I don't think you can. The technology isn't there. And genomics is a very unequal data enterprise too, with most of the studies being done on European ancestry populations.
Thank you. I see now questions proliferating from the floor, but we don't have much time. Thomas, please.
Well, thank you. I keep being fascinated by our Finnish study and also unpacking a little bit the factors like housing, loneliness. I was thinking if you can go a little bit further in unpacking some of the results, and I was thinking about two very basic dimensions. One is the socioeconomic stratification, how much does it play a role? And then going into final geospatial levels, how much the location where people live plays a role in these associations, because that would be also super exciting to study in Korea, how much the place where people live affects their childlessness and, of course, all the other behaviors you mentioned.
Can I take the other couple of questions, and then perhaps you give a quick answers to all?
Thanks very much for an insightful presentation. I just wanted to make a comment, I think on the alcohol. And we know that ecological studies are really difficult to kind of use to show causation. It's very difficult to really be able to do it. But at an individual level, we know that excessive alcohol intake is actually not good for fertility. right? That's an individual patient level. We know that it's not good. And healthcare providers will always advise reduction in amount of alcohol intake. But it's not necessarily the case that countries that have high per capita intake of alcohol have the lowest fertility. So that's a totally different thing. I think your point about mental health and what it means it raises a question of what proceeds, what comes before, whether decline in total fertility or lack of sexual activity or failing to get married because of stress precedes everything else, and alcohol is just a symptom. But I just wanted to make the point around the individual level data being very different from what we see at ecological level. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. There was another one.
Thank you. My question is very closely related to Thomas' question, just whether the location of the current urban planning is exposing people to be more vulnerable to the correlation between their mental health and fertility. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take those in order then. Yeah, so the socioeconomic stratification, I think this is a big one. I think that, that's where you see that the lower educated or the people, that's what I was talking about, ineligibility. There's a huge group that are just particularly women that are ineligible for a lot of these policies because they're self-employed or working informal. So I think that's really important, and it seems to hit those groups the most. And then what you've seen is the decreases the increases in childlessness have occurred in many countries in the lowest educated groups. So it used to be, that these groups were always the ones that had more children, but now you see it across the board. And the same case was in the Finnish study and the Swedish study that we showed. It was actually the lower educated, and that's financial reasons and economic reasons as well. I think the geospatial aspect is really important, and I think it was highlighted as well too. And it relates to Muji's question as well too. I think it's an urban planning issue actually, and that's why I wanted to bring it forward. Is all of this commuting and the housing prices and the location of the childcare, that seems like an infrastructure urban planning issue. So that's why I wanted to raise it, because I hadn't heard it discussed yet. So the housing prices, yeah, again, I think it's a bit downstream. It's like, why are we all, instead of questioning why are we all living in Seoul, wondering, is it an urban planning issue? It's a good point about alcohol. I wasn't trying to make a direct, association with alcohol consumption and fertility, although there have been some studies, as you note, that show an association. But I think, what we found by looking at the medical records was that those who are childless, particularly men, have a much higher odds of being admitted to the hospital multiple times for acute alcohol intoxication. So this is not having a couple drinks. This is really severe. And we did a mediation causal analysis, which my economist will like, and when we saw that it was, the factor was they weren't entering into partnerships. So this kind of behavior actually, means that maybe you can't meet partners or you don't. But and I showed it that it's age dependent, so it's an addiction as well too. So I just wanted to raise that point because I think alcohol, you can see it as it's definitely a disease, but there has to be why are people doing this to cope with their mental health stress in comparison to other mechanisms.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking again Melinda for her excellent presentation.